You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS.
Welcome again to Convenience Matters, everyone. My name is John Eichberger, the Executive Director of the Fuels Institute and with NACS, and this is the program that tells you what's going on in the world for convenience. If it powers you, powers your car, chances are you picked it up at a convenience store. 160 million Americans, half of the population, visit a convenience store every single day, and this is where we talk about the things that matter, and I'm joined today by my co-host,
Donovan Woods, also of the Fuels Institute. And John, I'm a little excited today. We have a great speaker that I'm looking forward to hearing more about. Her name is Becky Steckler. She's from Urbanism Next. She's a program manager at the Sustainable Cities Initiative over there at the University of Oregon. So I can't wait to hear what she has to say. So Becky, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's good to finally get you on the phone and talk to you, and I'm glad that our audience will get a chance to hear about you. The perspective I think you're going to bring will be something that I think they'll appreciate. Now, help me understand this. As with Urbanism Next and with what you do, you're not an architect, you're not an engineer. What is urbanism or land design? What does that actually mean?
Right. Thank you so much. Well, Urbanism Next really focuses on what are going to be the impacts of emerging technologies. So, and specifically, we're looking at autonomous vehicles, e-commerce, and the sharing economy, and what will be the impacts of those emerging technologies on land use and transportation, urban design, and even real estate markets. And then what are the implications of all of those changes on issues related to equity, governance, the environment, and the economy. So there's definitely a lot to potentially unpack around these particular topics. And just for the record, I'm a land use planner, but my coworker here at the Sustainable Cities Initiative is an architect, and we really branch out and try to bring in a lot of different disciplines to help inform this conversation.
So a lot of our listeners are retailers by trade, and the things that you rattled off, autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, mobile commerce, all these new technologies are something that's on the top of their mind every single day. And Donna and I were talking before we came in, I think about this, and the forecast is we're going to have 100 million more Americans in the United States by 2060. Where are they going to live? Where are they going to shop? How are they going to move around? And these are questions we need to be thinking about very strategically and very rationally, because if we're not planning now, it's going to come on us and we're not going to be ready to handle it.
I think you're absolutely right. I'm at a slight advantage because I live in the state of Oregon. I'm actually in Portland, Oregon, and Oregon has a statewide land use planning program. So all of the cities that are in the state actually have to think about the growth that's coming and how to plan for that. And so, and a lot of cities around the country do that as well. And there's some really significant challenges because most of, say, the land use plans and transportation plans, the way you create those is you look at the past and you say, well, what have we done in the past? And then you kind of forecast that out into the future and say, well, it's going to look something like that. And, we'll change a few things here and there. But with autonomous vehicles and even the sharing economy, especially the transportation network companies, TNCs, like Uber and Lyft, are really changing that dynamic. And what we're coming to understand is that the future isn't going to look anything like the past. And we really need to think a lot differently and a lot more creatively about really planning for that future because it's coming quick, and there's a lot of different people, from government to industry, that really needs to adapt and change if they're really gonna thrive. And I think there's some great opportunities for folks to thrive in this new economy.
Becky, you sound a little bit more excited than any of the other planners I've talked to, any of the blogs I've read, any of the reports I've read from other urbanists or designers. And I say that because most of us look to the future excited. What's going to happen? What kind of cars are we going to drive? Where are we going to live? But looking at the typical cycle of a planner being 15, almost 30 years, when you're looking out, forecasting what to do, a lot of the designers, when I read their articles, are terrified. They feel as though they're already behind. So your attitude is so refreshing. I appreciate that. Maybe you're hiding that.
There's so many of the presentations I see or the conversations I have. It's like, on the one hand, it's either kind of, dystopia or utopia, kind of the heaven or hell, and these, at the base of it, especially with autonomous vehicles, about 37,000 people die every year from vehicle crashes. And so there's a great safety component that I think that we can really take advantage of. And I'm a mom, and I think about my kids. And one of the reasons I don't want my kids, running around the neighborhood is because I'm worried about traffic and them, not paying attention. So I, as a mom and as a land use planner that's thinking about transportation, I think that that's just a great opportunity. And there's a lot of other opportunities as well. To really think about, how you serve anybody that has any kind of, physical challenges, whether you're in a wheelchair or maybe you're blind. I think this really opens up that access to transportation to even younger folks as well, if we can figure out some of the security issues. But I am, like many of the other people you're probably talking to, I do have a lot of concerns about, if we just kind of let the industry decide what is going to happen in our cities, there's the possibility that congestion and other kind of negative aspects might actually, really increase. And so I think if we're planning for it and we really think about the policies, really, you got to start with what do you want your community and your city or your neighborhood to be, and really start with those kind of overall goals. And then from there, make sure that, all of this technology really helps you achieve those goals, and don't just try to accommodate the technology and let it happen to you.
And that's, I like that approach. What's the vision? What are we trying to achieve? What I keep getting frustrated with, and I've been called a curmudgeon because I believe everything's going to happen a lot more slowly than everybody else around me thinks. But I believe that because everybody's trying to say, this is the solution. Autonomous vehicles will solve all of our ills. Autonomous electric vehicles are the answer. Well, okay, autonomous vehicles, if you get the really bad driving humans off the road, big accomplishment. But autonomous vehicles in and of themselves could actually increase commute distances by increasing our tolerance for a commute because we can multitask. They could actually exacerbate congestion. They could actually exacerbate fuel demand and pollution if it's not done in a strategic way. And I'm with you. There's certain non-mobile demographics where autonomous vehicles are going to be an absolute life-changing experience, and that is fantastic. And I think autonomous vehicles have an ability to really improve our flow of traffic and improve safety. But unless we do it in a strategic way, they're just going to make the problem worse.
Absolutely. And I think, first off, I think we're seeing some of those impacts right now with ride-sharing companies because they're coming, it's the driver version of autonomous vehicles. And it really is starting to change, transportation as, transportation as a service as opposed to providing it for yourself. And so, I think once you get autonomous vehicles, it just really magnifies all of those potential impacts. Everything from, kind of congestion at the drop-off zone. And I keep on thinking of anyone who's, dropped off kids in a suburban location, that just the traffic of all those parents coming in to drop off their kids and getting out again. It's just, it can often be kind of a nightmare. It's definitely a transportation nightmare that needs to really be managed. Or at the airport is another good example.
And the human behavior element. So Donovan and I actually drove together to the studio today. Probably the first time I've had somebody in my car other than a family member in I don't know how long. I don't share my car. I don't share my space with people. And I think a lot of people feel that way. And how do we get people to start recognizing that to really address some of these bigger societal issues, we need to actually start sharing the personal space of a transportation entity, whether it be a pod, a vehicle, whatever it is. We have to share our space. And Americans don't like sharing space.
Some don't, but I think if you price it right, then you put those incentives in the right place. And ultimately, a lot of times it's the price that really matters, and that is a place where you can get fewer people. And I say price not just with actually the hard cash coming out of your pocket, but also the price of time. So, and that's something where one of my concerns, and one of the concerns of a lot of people, is what will be the impact of these technologies on transit. Because, of course, one of the most efficient ways of moving a lot of people is to figure out the most efficient way to move them, and thinking about buses or subways or someplace where you move a lot of people in the same vehicle kind of at the same time. And there's some question. AVs are right now. It's looking like the cost to take an AV ride is really going to dramatically go down compared to what it costs to actually own and operate your own vehicle. And so, but if and economic theory would tell us that as the price of something that's very desirable goes down, then people consume more of it. And so if that's the case, then we see congestion kind of going through the roof. And this is one area where transit, especially that transit like a light rail or something that gets out of congestion, gets kind of away from those cars, can really save on time. But there's that risk that if AVs get really cheap, then and if they're cheaper than transit, then what happens to the revenue models? Can transit really stay viable? Can it stay in business or not? That said, too, there's policy implications, and AVs are likely. There's a lot of different ways they think about or communicate with the environment that they're in, both having cameras and seeing what's out there, but also the potential for vehicle-to-vehicle communications. They can say, "Hey, there's another car coming," and they communicate with each other, or vehicle-to-infrastructure. And so we might want to say, as a society, we want the transportation system to be as efficient as possible. So let's prioritize transit and buses and give them the first right to get through an intersection or go down a street, and maybe not prioritize the individual vehicles that aren't moving people as efficiently. There's a lot of potential, and this is why I'm optimistic, is there's a lot of potential to really think about what we want and to really make transportation so much more efficient than it is today. And that's what I get excited about. But there's a real you got to have that political will behind it to make these things happen.
You do, definitely. But, I read something on your site. It's a great site, Urbanism Next, and it has a section just for blogs and resources. And something that came out in October from the National Association of City Transportation Officials, they kind of gave their blueprint in 6 different steps as to what will be success, how success could be measured. I want to run through those really quickly with you because, well, let me run through them, then I'll ask my question.
Okay.
The first is this. It says safety has to be a top priority, then providing mobility for the entire city, rebalancing the right of way. Who has the right of way at which intersection? Rebalancing also managing streets in real time, move more with fewer vehicles. And then number 6, the public benefit guides private action. All of those together sound great. I think it would be a great solution. It's a nice blueprint. But what city in America, or are there multiple cities, or where is the funding coming from to actually make these things happen? The vision you had when you just mentioned not only AVs, but also public transit, everyone's walking, everyone's happy, there's bike lanes. How do you just start cutting up a city? Who pays for that?
You bring up a really good issue, and there's a lot of questions. What I see with this technology is so much disruption, so much change from how we've done things in the past to how we do it in the future, and definitely that revenue question is really big and out there. And this is a place where cities are going to have to make some changes, make some tough decisions. So one of the things, especially with autonomous vehicles, is that a lot of cities are looking at a model that would encourage electrified vehicles that are fleets instead of individually owned and connected and autonomous. And so that has implications for, if they're electric, then what Americans pay for fuel taxes goes down. And so you have to think about, how do we pay for other things? If people aren't driving themselves anymore, we're probably not going to be purchasing driver's licenses or paying those fees. And we still might have ID fees, but that's just another change in where the revenue is coming from, as well as there's a lot of people that won't be purchasing cars. And so if it's a shared fleet, then registration fees are going to go down too. And so that presents a real challenge for how you pay for infrastructure. At the same time, and we can stop there. I want to talk about the opportunity to actually manage congestion that's on the road as well.
Go ahead and do that.
Okay, great. So the other opportunity, at the same time, I would say we've got this great opportunity to actually look at and think about how you can price the congestion that's on the road to kind of get to those public benefits and actually price congestion. So, and there's different ways that people have done it historically around the world. Congestion pricing is not common. I'm not even sure if there's a place that really does it here in the United States, but London is probably the most famous, and there's been efforts in New York, I know, but that haven't passed yet. And I think this comes down to really, we might need to change the way we think about streets, and instead of thinking of them as a public space that anybody has access to, we might want to think about them almost more like a utility that has a limited capacity. And anyone who's stuck in congestion understands that it really is inconvenient, and there are real costs to getting stuck in congestion. And so maybe we should be pricing it to really try to move that needle and get the system much more efficient.
So let me see if I can make this even more complicated. Because
I'm sure you can.
Within the NACS world, when we're talking about the long-term future of the convenience fuel retailing sector, the NACS research teams kind of come up with this diagram that says we have to look at three main areas that intersect: where people live, where they get stuff, where they shop, and how they move. And if we are looking at mobility in isolation, all these options really make that a complicated topic. But I think to really address some of the bigger picture issues you're identifying, that a lot of groups have identified, and they're important issues we got to address, we need to look at the entire pie. We need to look at how people work, where they work. We have to look at how they shop. And you talk about e-commerce and mobile delivery, and a lot of people are talking about let's have everything delivered by drone. All these different things. They all kind of conflate into the same pool of issues that if we can strategically identify paths for where we work, where we shop, and how we move, now we can start seeing the semblance of a long-term sustainable plan that makes sense.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Land use planners often talk about the land use transportation connection. And really, that's a lot of what planners do, is think about how you can get, residential housing in places where people want to be, either where they're shopping or closer to jobs. And that's definitely something we do here. We think about in Oregon, and sometimes we do a better job than others. And a lot of other communities are really thinking about that as well. And when you don't provide enough housing, then I think you see a lot of the really high housing prices, especially in desirable areas. And so. And this is, again, kind of where one of those opportunities with autonomous vehicles, especially as more people take trips, then it reduces the demand for parking because they're not driving their own cars and parking in different places. And so it's almost as if we've land banked, all these parking, either garages or parking lots that can then be redeveloped, and especially in places where people really want to be. And I think we have this, again, a great opportunity to really think about, where do we need more development, whether it's housing or additional retail or, place for jobs, commercial or office space or industrial space, and be able to redevelop some of those, those parking lots for that kind of use, and especially prioritizing areas that are either close to transit or, in commercial corridors, or even in some of those suburban locations where people want to live and they want to have that feel of not being in a big city, and they want to be, kind of in a more suburban place. But I think even there's some great opportunities to get people closer to, and their housing closer to, to shops and to schools and to their jobs.
Donovan, in our book Urbanization, we did a little bit of analysis of these multi-use environments, and we got a lot of them here in the Washington, D.C. area. And it'd be interesting to see, how that planning process progresses over the years, because some of them have been successful, some of them not so much. But I think that multi-use facility that is connected by some sort of mobility solution is a great starting point, and see how that all ties together.
I feel like we've discussed a lot of things, and I'm the kind of person that likes to have an answer at the end of the discussion. And I feel like we've just scratched the surface as to what the possibilities are. But also, now, Becky, can you tell me a little bit more about your convention? Because I think that's a great place where we can continue the discussion. I know it's sometime in March, the Urbanism Next conference. What is that about?
Absolutely. Well, this is where we are partnering with 4 different professional associations. So we're getting planners together with landscape architects and architects as well as developers. And so working with all of those different professional organizations and inviting, as well as academics, because I do work at the University of Oregon, which is just great to be able to talk to all the folks thinking about it. And so we're bringing them to Portland for 2.5 days from March 5th through 7th this next year in 2018. And we're going to be talking about all of these different issues and really getting down to, what does this mean for policy? What does it mean for governments? What does it mean for business? And especially developers, kind of as the city's going to redevelop and really change over the next 10 to 30 years. What are some of the things that we should be planning for? So I'm really excited. We're getting folks from all across the country to have these conversations.
That's awesome.
And it's turning out great.
I think that's a convention that I might happen to stop by up there in Portland. So look for me there. Thank you, Becky.
Yeah.
Thank you for making the time for us. Good conversation on urbanism and what's happening in the future. And I appreciate you being here.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed my time here.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. For more information, go to nacsonline.com.